Audiences often associate software-driven art with a certain kind of randomness. And while there certainly is an element of that in the software choreographies, they are also very intentional in terms of the objects and assets that Marina has drawn. The plastic bag that appears, for example, both signaling a kind of contamination and pollution of the environment, but also making you hopeful with its smiley face that there is an alternative to all of that. So every animated element here also carries a story. I'm Christiane Paul, Curator of Digital Art at the Whitney Museum and the curator of the exhibition Marina Zurkow Parting World and the Hyundai Terrace Commission.
My name is David Lisbon, and I'm a curatorial assistant here at the Whitney, and I was the curatorial assistant for Parting Worlds as well as the Hyundai Terrace Commission.
We wanted this to be a very site-specific installation and thought about a few artists working in digital media. Marina's work in particular struck us as being very specific to the history of the Hudson. Her practice is also very research-based, so she seemed to be an ideal candidate for doing a work that was both large-scale and very connected to the site of the Whitney Museum. The exhibition Parting World includes 3 works, 2 of them in the Kaufmann Gallery here, 1 of them out on the terrace. And all of these works by Zurkow are software-driven animations. All of the animations are actually hand-drawn and then assembled into choreographies by the software. The work outside on the terrace is the second Hyundai commission and combines a physical installation with a large-scale screen. All of the works in the show are dealing with ecological systems in the broadest sense. The works here in the gallery are a little bit more focused on mining and extraction, while the outer work deals with ecological, social, and economic systems.
And something important to factor into your thought process about all of this work is that Marina has a cumulative practice and that all of these works build on one another, build on the ideas and the technology that came in the previous work to make something that is more detailed and maybe even a little bit more real time.
One of the works in the Kaufmann Gallery is Mesocosm, Wink, Texas. And this is an animation that was done pretty early in 2012. It entered the Whitney Museum's collection in 2018, and it is exploring the site of a sinkhole in the town of Wink, Texas, which Marina discovered on Google Earth as this dark black spot and then explored further what this might be. So the work basically gives you a view of the site around this sinkhole, which Marina is treating very much like a geological event. You have a set point of view, but you will see many, many quote-unquote actors entering and exiting the space. And those range from wildlife, coyotes, birds of all kinds, owls or bats at night, to humans. You might see people in hazmat suits crossing that space. And what is very important here is that this is not a loop, it is not a video. The software actually brings together these constellations of agents. The work also operates on a cycle through the seasons. So you will be watching the site over the course of a whole year. The time frame is a little compressed, so 1 second is a minute, which means that 144 hours would be a year. So the site is changing through the seasons. You see different types of animals or events and really get an impression of an ecosystem.
What I think is so interesting and sort of useful about Mesocosm, Wink, Texas is the placement of the clock and the reminder that it is actually a day and a time that you're experiencing. that element really allows the user to become a part of this artwork by understanding some of the constraints that are actually restricting what's happening inside the software.
The other work in the Kaufman Gallery is Marina's The Earth Eaters, a work she did in collaboration with James Schmitz, who worked on the software system. It's a 7-channel installation. 4 of those channels or screens are once again animations that are driven by a software that does all of the choreography. And then you also have smaller screens which show you loops. So what you're seeing are islands that are continuously emerging from or sinking into the sea. The islands are populated by an army of miners. You also see animals hanging out on them. You occasionally see drill bits with instruments of war, such as drones or tanks, emerging from the earth. And you're also seeing these golden human statues that kind of symbolize human superiority over the earth. The work aesthetically looks like a woodcut, and it is actually based on woodcuts from the mid-16th century, those of Georgius Agricola, who is known as the father of geology and also laid the groundwork for modern mining. And Marina trained an AI model on the woodcuts of Agricola and let it generate different types of islands. To be clear here, it's not like the software is driven by generative AI, but the islands themselves have been created by those AI models. And the same goes for the animals, which are based on the menagerie that Konrad Gessner created also in the mid-16th century, and he is known as the father of zoology. So altogether, the work really makes us think about the long history of mining and extraction and its effects.
Another element that makes this piece really interesting is the gold flecks on the screens that are looping. These gold flecks are sort of an allusion to all of the different beings on the planet who are affected by global warming and human extraction. I also think that this work does a really good job of using the parable as a sort of storytelling vehicle. A lot of people come in and they're like, is this about a specific political figure? Is this about a specific political incident? And, Marina is using a parable to talk about the history of humanity, which we are still continuing to live through. And so the parable becomes a valuable way to talk about something that we've all experienced at different scales and different sizes.
The work is accompanied by 3-channel sound, so you hear the lapping of the waves, you also hear the sounds of the animals, you hear a certain kind of sound when the drill bits with weapons of war are emerging, and this is actually the winding up of an antique clock that Sarah Rothberg, who did the soundtrack, used here. And then faintly in the background, you also hear Marina's voice reading an alphabetical list of metals and minerals. Both Mesocosm Wink Texas and the Earth Eaters in this gallery are works that are addressing the extraction of natural resources, covering very different time frames. The Earth Eaters, although it's a very recent piece, really looks at the history of mining, while Mesocosm Wink Texas, with its oil refineries burning in the background, really shows you the effects of extraction in this day and age. Since the exhibition takes place both indoors and outdoors, it also was important to us that you have a view of the terraces from the indoor gallery. We do not always open up the windows of the Kaufman Gallery. Sometimes we close it off as a black box. So in this case, it's all about connection of these two environments. And as you look outside, you see this massive video wall with a split view of the Hudson River. So you have elements above the water and underwater directly relating to the Hudson River, which you can watch from the terrace, and the installation on the terrace extends the underwater environment. So there are elements that take physical forms. In the animated software, you see a sunken boat. You also see so-called reef balls, which are used for growing oyster reefs, and those take physical form on the terrace. The sunken boat becomes a seating area for watching what goes on the screen, and on the far end of the terrace, you also see the actual reef balls. The river is a circle is a very complex piece, once again created by Marina in collaboration with James Schmitz. It builds on two previous works, Hudson Follies and Does the River Flow Both Ways, both from 2022, that already gave you the split view of the Hudson, but did not contain all of the elements we're seeing here. It's very important to keep in mind that this is not a video, it's not a loop. There are about 400 assets and actors in this piece, and once again, the software assembles those according to different periods of time, and Marina actually thinks about these as gangs of time that are colliding in the space driven by the software. All of it is hand-drawn, rotoscoped animation, and all of these hand-drawn elements are then put into motion on the screen through the software. The work is accompanied by a glossary that gives you all of the detail about every asset you see here. You can identify the fish underwater or historical elements that appear.
So in working on putting this exhibition together with Marina and the architect Blake Goebel, we really wanted to make sure that the connections to the Hudson River were tangible and accessible to our audiences who are going to be experiencing this physically. And so within our installation, there's the ship prow that's protruding from the fifth floor terrace. And if you stand in the middle of it, you kind of have a perfect vantage point on your left-hand side of our screen and on the right-hand side of the Hudson River. And you can see piers, you can see some of the marine traffic that actually correlates with what's happening on the screen.
What you see floating above the water are essentially 6 historical period, the time of the Lenape, who originally occupied the land that the Whitney Museum is built on. Then colonial times, the 19th century, then a huge jump to the 1970s. So you see a lot of art in that period. You see the history of the piers with all of the nightclubs, with the sex workers and nightlife, but also AIDS clinics. And then we have a period where you see gentrification, all of the stores arriving. And then Marina did 2 versions of a future. Both of them are pretty dark. One is a little darker than the other. So in the darkest version, you see, for example, little barges with tents or garbage floating by, or apartment complexes with masked guards. And the other future is a little bit more focused on solar punk, on ways of basically sustaining the environment. You see solar panels and beautiful gardens, but also the impacts of climate change.
Another exciting thing about the screen that we have on the fifth floor terrace from Marina Zurkow is the fact that all of the kind of weather information and the ship information is coming in real time. This information helps people, one, to understand this is actually a reflection of what's happening in real time on this site, but also to think about the data that is produced along the Hudson River, and that data will be in sort of a long continuum when people look back at what was happening on the site at this moment.
So when it comes to the underwater landscape, everything that you see is also inhabitants of the actual Hudson River. Marina worked with the Hudson River Trust to get that river ecology right. So all of the fish are ones that you actually would see underwater in the Hudson. and in the glossary you can look up which one is which. You see more diverse than you actually would see, and in the future scenario, there are little pods with joggers that are floating underwater, imagining how we would use or might use the Hudson River at some point. What I would like viewers to take away from the river is a circle in particular is an idea of the complexity of ecological systems. Marina's work, of course, addresses climate change, extraction, sustainability, and futures on some level, but it is really about ecological systems, be they economic ones or social ones. And I find it particularly intriguing that she chose not to do a chronological sequence of time periods, but has these gangs of time collide with each other. What it really makes obvious, in my opinion, is how we are repeating certain cycles. If we are looking, for example, at the trade of beaver felt heads in colonial times, and then a period of gentrifications and different forms of trade, of engaging with the land, I think it just gives you a better idea of how we need to address these cycles in a productive way and can achieve more sustainable ecological systems. The three works in Parting Worlds are really in conversation with each other, although they have different aesthetics. The Earth Eaters looking like an early woodcut, and the river is a circle being much more of its time. They are all addressing ecological systems, and the title itself, Parting Worlds, also alludes to this element. You're looking at the split view of the Hudson River that gives you a window into social and economic systems or ecological systems underwater. You have the parting world in Mesocosm, where a sinkhole literally causes disruption. And you have the parting world in the Earth Eaters, where literally the sea is parting to have these islands emerge. So there is a very cyclical structure of change and of systems to all of the work in the exhibition.
I think Marina has done a wonderful job of taking different sites, Wink, Texas, the sinkhole, or the site of these woodcuts, or the site of the Hudson River, and really used her imagination to expand them into these inhabitable zones. I think that what viewers can really take away from this exhibition is that there's something happening on the other side of where we are. And so whether you're above ground and it's something that's happening underwater, this exhibition does a good job of helping people to embody spaces that they may never physically be able to embody, as a way to say, you know, your actions affect these spaces as well as the spaces that you know and understand.
In many ways, Marina's work really captures the essence of digital art. There still is a lot of handmade work involved, and Marina combines animation with very sophisticated software-driven work. And I would say that the art resides as much in the concept itself, in the animations, as it does in the software choreography. Arranging these elements on screen is really making the dancers move across the stage. There's so much to think about in turning this into a successful vision.
What's great about this work of art and many works of software art is that they can live on different screens across different spaces at different scales. We were lucky to partner with the Times Square Arts Alliance to present this work as the Midnight Moment for the month of September in the year 2025. And so for about 3 minutes every night, you could see Marina Zurkow's work across most of the screens in Times Square.
Times Square obviously is a highly commercial space. There are hundreds and hundreds of people just walking through, even at midnight. And it's really amazing to see that landscape being disrupted when a midnight moment unfolds. With Marina's work in particular, people really paused, suddenly being reminded of being on an island, Manhattan, surrounded by the Hudson River, and this whole landscape, and seeing swarms of fish in gigantic size floating across those screens was really an amazing sight.